Hello, friends, and welcome back to the Performance Mindset Show. I'm your host, Amy Calandrino, CEO of Beyond Commercial and author of the book From Perfect to Real. This show is all about leveling up in business, real estate, leadership, and life by shifting how you think, grow, and lead. So each week, I'm going to bring to you real conversations with top performers and mindset experts who are building big lives on their own. If you're ready to ditch perfection, trust your path, and grow with intention, you're in the right place. Be sure to subscribe and let's get into it. So today I have with me Lindsey Frances, and she is a pioneering performance and behavior change specialist who combines sophrology, psychology, and innovative coaching techniques through the conscious change method. So to help clients transform their well-being, specializing in performance recovery, sleep, and inflammatory condition management, she delivers immediate, measurable results backed by advanced wearable technology data from Whoop devices. So as an internationally recognized sophrologist and member of the British Psychological Society, she uses both Eastern and Western methodologies and has developed a unique approach that addresses the root cause of health challenges rather than just treating them. Using Whoop's sophisticated biometric tracking, clients can see quantifiable improvements in their heart rate variability, HRV. I've been talking about this a lot on my podcast, actually. Resting heart rate, RHR, and sleep quality scores. These objective measurements consistently demonstrate reduced stress levels and enhanced recovery metrics after implementing these protocols. As a thought leader in emotional wealth creation, Lindsey brings a holistic understanding to the interconnected nature of physical, mental, and emotional well-being and motivation. Through personalized guidance, evidence-based techniques, and data insights, she helps clients achieve sustainable physical, mental, and emotional transformations that enhance every aspect of their lives. Here we go. We are here. So welcome to the show, Lindsey.
Thank you, Amy, for that rather beautiful and extensive deep dive introduction. It said it all. Do we need to continue?
Well, I want to know who you do this for. So it says you make these transformations. Who do you do it for, and how did you get into it? Let's jump right into that.
Amy, thank you so much for asking me to be on the show. It's very exciting because we're at a distance. I'm in Europe, you're in North America. So thank you for reaching out. And I would love to talk about who I serve. I'm very privileged to have both a physical clinic and an online practice. And I work with founders and leaders and entrepreneurs who are losing the grind and keen to step up to the next level. I think you know the types where they get to the point where they think, I just don't think I can continue. And whilst they're not at the doctors saying, sign me off work, it's coming to the end, they are feeling that their energy is declining, their sleep is suffering, and actually the joy of life is disappearing, despite normally extensive success. So those are the people that I work with. And as you so beautifully mentioned, I am an emotional wealth advisor. I use sophrological, now I'm getting stuck on the same word, sophrological techniques and psychological techniques. And sophrology is a method that's been around since the 1960s. It is ultimately the study of consciousness in harmony. And it involves a number of beautiful techniques in combination, personalized for the client, depending on what it is they're trying to achieve. So you may find a typical session involves rather a deep dive into biometric data. All my clients wear Whoop or Aura rings, so I can see exactly what they're up to. I also occasionally use continuous glucose monitors. We ask people to check their pulse. We may be asking them to take their blood pressure and record any other information that will help us see really what's going on beneath the surface. And in a session, we'll be talking about data, but also using sophrological tools like visualization, meditation, and breathwork. And there are hundreds of them. Caicedo, the founder, designed an incredible method that gets blended together to create transformational change.
It's interesting that often how you think, drives the decisions that you make and thereby drives the outcomes that you achieve. So by you doing this work to the overall person driving how they feel, how they think, ultimately, thereby as well, ultimately probably produces better outcomes in their business or what they do. What do you find to be true?
Absolutely, Amy. And I'm fascinated by the study of neuroeconomics in particular, the science of financial decision making made really on how we feel. And I think you will agree that if our nervous system is firing in fight or flight, we simply can't make the quality decisions that we would be making if we were in rest or digest. So, as a founder or a leader, if you are investable, you really do need to be able to evidence that you can keep yourself in rest and digest, you are maximizing your decision making capacity, and you really are capable of doing the job you're being paid to do.
Well, yeah, if you're in that fight or flight type of mode, what, obviously going through this transformation can help with that. But what are some immediate things if you're a founder or you're a leader and you're finding yourself in that mode to try to get into some level of rest and digest? What are some tactics that you would generally suggest they deploy?
Well, before I talk about tactics, what I will say is unfortunately, people want to pretend that they're not in fight or flight. So they come
Oh,
to
that's true.
me. Yes, they come to me, and I'm sure you find the same. People say, I'm okay. And then you say, are you really? And of course, if somebody is using a wearable health tracker, we look immediately to their heart rate variability score. And when we see that that's low, we know full well that the nervous system is in fight or flight more than it's in rest or digest. But people are also frightened of the data. So the resistance I have for people wearing biometric trackers is quite large. So listen up, those people that are already wearing them. You've already done half the work. Awareness is curative. So when we do have a client that comes in happy, wearing a tracker, and we begin to look at the data, and of course, my level of expertise is a deep dive into the data way beyond what the algorithm is really showing you. Then we can start by saying, okay, this is the method that we use. And the very first step to doing anything, Amy, is to pause, be still, and know. That in itself is the biggest challenge. And then we move on to steps 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6.
I find I was invited on Twitter. I'm very active on Twitter, and I'm part of this group called Retwit. So that's real estate Twitter people, right? And I'm actually in this Retwit Fit group.
Whoa.
I'm trying to say that 10 times fast. And it's incredible how many people do wear Whoop bands. So then if you already are wearing the bands, which they have me curious. I mean, I have my Apple Watch, and now I've made HRV like a favorite, and I'm starting to do these things. But then you have this, right? It's like almost like you have like the map, but then where are you going, and what do you do with it, or how do you make any kind of transformational change? But I found that I'm like, when you think about it, a lot of those people have already done like half the work.
They have. And the fine tuning, of course, means that the results are really quite exceptional. So it's a bit like being a jogger and then already having the skills to run, and then suddenly having a marathon coach, and 6 weeks later, you've run all 24 or 25 miles. It really is that point. If you can catch people who are already watching the data and have already decided that they'd like to do something about it, that's where we really get rapid change. And if you start looking at sleep data, for example, it's very, very easy to see what's going on at night. When are you waking up? Well, that will tell us a little bit about whether it's cortisol, adrenals, glucose, stress, light, noise. And then we can start saying very quickly, well, what do we need to change to improve that sleep? And the changes can happen, Amy, within a matter of days. But you do need somebody to help you. It's a bit like trying to look under the bonnet of your own car and figure out what's going on. You really need to go to the garage, plug it into one of those diagnostic machines, and use the expertise you need to be able to find out exactly what's going on.
And then how did you end up getting into this line of work? What was your background before? And then when did you start being able to kind of take and extrapolate this data? And then again, of course, coming up with the technique. Can you talk a little bit about that before we get into more granular? topics?
Of course. My background didn't start out walking around at the age of 21 post graduation saying I was an emotional wealth advisor. I started out in business consultancy. I then ended up in leadership management development and spent some time as a freelance business consultant before going into business psychology. And when I began to look at the way people behaved, it's always been a fascination of mine. And my parents will tell anybody that Lindsay's been saying, "Who are you? Why do you do what you do?" from about the age of 6. I'm always wondering why I do what I do and you do what you do, because they're always uniquely different. And we are very, very individual. So I was always interested to see what was going on in the world around me. In that process, I became highly, highly ambitious and very successful in my own field, and unfortunately left my body behind. So I became a giant walking head that thought I was terribly clever and very good at work. But I didn't really realize that I had a body that could do things or tell me things as well. So although I've always trained pretty hard, I also drank quite a lot and let my body sort of just lag along behind until my head became so busy I didn't really know how to turn it off. At that point, I discovered the mind-body connection and realized I had a whole body and then a whole emotional body to hang out in and a spiritual body. And I suddenly had about 4 times as much fun as I had just hanging out in my rather busy, noisy head. So that's when I became very, very interested in the science of behavior change and then using biometric data to actually evidence and find out what's really going on.
What's a number? Obviously you went through this whole behavioral change and you shifted things, which is great, because you don't want to buy a house from a residential agent that doesn't own a house, or you wouldn't want to, have your car worked out. You want to work with someone that has been through this and it can be your Sherpa and help lead you, up the mountain. What were some of the numbers that you saw, change in immediately as you kind of went through this metamorphosis? Or can you speak to what you experienced?
Yeah, of course I can. I started watching my resting heart rate because it's an easy one. And I started riding a road bike about 8 years ago and started being really intrigued. The more I rode, the fitter I got, the more my resting heart rate went down. So that gave me a great incentive. Of course, as a woman, often we watch our weight on the scales, which is sometimes helpful and sometimes not. And I also watched the way my body changed. And I began to think, gosh, I can actually find a lever here to change things physically, mentally, and emotionally. And then when I started digging into HRV, I realized that I could change those figures almost from 15 up to 100 really, really quickly just by doing certain things.
It's interesting. I had someone on my show a few weeks ago, and one tweak that he had is, why do you do 10 reps 3 times of, working out? Why don't you do this way? And so I'm sure you have a lot of other tools and recommendations, but I have not looked at it again to see if that made any difference. But it's pretty cool. So
I think any data is interesting, Amy, isn't it? And you wouldn't run your business unless you knew what your numbers were. So why run our bodies without knowing what the numbers are? Then we have the flip side where we have too many numbers, and I'm sure you've been for blood draws or you've had various bits of data. You end up with too much information and then you don't know what to do with it. And my job is to help people cut through that.
Well, you did talk a little bit about the 6 steps, and then obviously with those 6 steps, what are the key metrics? I think we've already talked about them. Are there any other key metrics that you find to be helpful to someone looking to effectuate change and level up?
I'm always looking at REM sleep as well, especially if people have got inflammation or feeling very stressed, perhaps have got joint problems or back issues. We do need enough REM sleep, and we need to have enough deep and REM for our bodies to relax completely. And of course, people do tell terrible fibs, Amy. They say, oh yes, I definitely go to bed by 10 o'clock and I get up at 6 and then I go to the gym. And then when they get a wearable and I start looking at the data and I say, gosh, what were you doing at 11:30 last night? Oh, well, my phone rang. So you were in bed at 10 and where was your phone? Well, next to me. Okay. Your subconscious knows that you've suddenly put a device next to you that can wake you up at any time. It's a bit like sleeping with your dog in the bedroom. If you do that and it's okay for you, then that is great. But if I let my dog in the bedroom, it's a complete nightmare. All he does is mess around, jump about, and lick my hands all evening. So please put your phone somewhere else, away from you, go to sleep and try and stay asleep. So I would always say, please look at your REM and deep sleep. Please look at your sleep duration. Please try and find time overnight to have at least 4 sleep cycles. Resting heart rate is also important, HRV, and I do ask people to look at their respiratory rate. Do you want me to talk a bit more about that, Amy, or should we talk about the data more broadly?
I think definitely talking a little bit more about the respiratory rate and why that would be helpful. And then for sleep cycles, again, I think for those that don't know, how long does it kind of take to get into that REM sleep? And, how long does each cycle usually last?
It's very personal how long it takes people to go to sleep. And I've got people wearing trackers from the age of 85 all the way down to 15. So you can imagine that their data is very, very different. The algorithm with Whoop and Aura was originally, I believe, built on professional cyclists, generally male, very, very slim and pretty fit. So not like, perhaps most of the population. The data is very personal, but a sleep cycle is normally around 90 minutes. And you would hope that people are going through 3, if not 5 of those a night. And you'll see that on any of the graphs that are tracking what's going on. The reason that I say respiratory rate is so important is because, as you know, if you sit here feeling stressed doing this, the body's in fight or flight. If you're sat being a sort of yogi, breathing deeply, relaxing, you're going to feel a lot better. And if your respiratory rate is higher, I think we can safely say you're probably doing more of this in the day and less of this. So I do a lot of breathing exercises with clients, and I also do recordings for my clients every single week, and they take those away. And then I ask them to show me when they actually did them on their stress scores. Because what happens is we see a lovely dip, as if they've gone to bed for 5 minutes, if they've done it properly. And then it comes back up again and they can start their day.
Yeah. I think so helpful. So yeah. Do you want to talk a little about things more broadly, or do you feel comfortable talking a bit about your overall process?
What I'd love to do is just remind people that the data out there and the science and the research around inflammatory conditions, dementia, cognitive decline, and cardiac issues all points to stress and sleep as being really, really important. I don't know about you, Amy, but one of the biggest resistance sentences I hear to doing work with me is I simply don't have time. And I often wonder, is it that they don't have time, or they're not sick enough, or they're too sick to think that they can recover it? And it's a very strange feeling as a coach and as an advisor to think, in normally 3 months, everything has changed with a client. And all I ask for normally is 2-hour-long sessions a month and 10 minutes a day of practice. I'm doing the rest of the work in terms of finding a toolkit that's absolutely personalized and bespoke enough to get you results on paper ASAP.
Well, I think the people that say they don't have time, that's a cop out because they just don't want to do it. I think you can always find time for the things that you want to do and that are important to you. And again, if you're talking about, there's 168 hours in a week, and you average 4.2 weeks in a month. So whatever 168 hours a week is times 4.2, that's how many hours you have. You're asking for 2 1-hour sessions. So that's, a very minuscule part, and maybe 10 minutes a day. That's not a big investment. And you're basically able to then from there hand over the data for you to analyze and create, a plan that, in a process you said like 3 months can create some great change. Perhaps what would be helpful as well is, do you have an example of someone that you've worked with that has gone through that transformation?
Yeah, I'd love to talk about a client, obviously anonymously, but
Yeah.
people are quite open with me about sharing, which is why I actually share a lot of testimonials on my own podcast. But the reason I'm talking about this particular person is because the name of your show, Performance Mindset Podcast, says it all. They had such a performance mindset and they were so geared up to achievement that they'd lost the joy in their life. So we're talking about a very high performing corporate partner who really did have it all, came to see me and said, look, I'm just coming to see you because I don't really feel like I'm loving everything quite as much as I should. Should I leave my job? Now, what's interesting, Amy, is some people do the work with me and then they do leave their jobs. But other people find a whole host of other things to enjoy, and the pain of the job becomes a lot less important. So, what happened there over the 3-month process is this person began to really think about how much they love their home. You've got a beautiful home, you probably live somewhere that's really nice, you might have a lovely garden, you might have a lovely family around you, or you might have pets or social activities. And they really began to feel the daily joy of that sort of daily bread type experience. And then it made everything else far more bearable. So they stayed in their job. They really began to experience that rich simplicity of being human. And it really made everything so much more pleasurable. And of course, their work performance improved massively because they weren't grinding, but they were using their intuition and able to work from a place that felt so much more fruitful than before.
Well, like you have said in the show, you're an emotional wealth advisor. I think being able to find the joy in your daily existence can be quite transformational.
Absolutely.
And then how long did it take for that person to kind of go through that process and have that almost like physiological and, overall kind of change in their disposition and come to that realization and be able to kind of realign things?
Because I always start talking to people about sleep, we see results within a matter of weeks. And of course, a good night's sleep and you're going to feel a lot better the next day anyway. Then, if you've got a toolkit to follow that's really focusing your mind on what it is you're trying to achieve, you can then plan far better to make sure you're aligned with your desires. So, in terms of timescales, we're seeing a matter of weeks, and then we're taking normally 3 months to embed those changes. So, we're looking for behavior change by scaffolding off existing behavior. So, for example, if you always have a coffee from your coffee machine in the morning, I might say, well, there's the point to have 10 minutes of doing your visualization whilst you do your coffee. So pause then, and then we'll make that a daily habit. I also have a real attention to detail in terms of the pillars of well-being. So I'm always asking people to track their sleep, nutrition, hydration, relaxation, recovery, and purpose points. And that purpose piece is also really, really important, because if I said, what's your purpose? People don't just say performance. They'll normally be a bit more specific about what it is they're trying to achieve financially, from a legacy perspective, or in terms of what they're giving back to the world.
Yeah, I got put on the spot the other day on my podcast. Someone asked me, like, well, what is your purpose? And I'm like, my kids. I mean, I realized that, you could do all these things. You could do the podcast, you can have a business, you can have all these different things, but at the end of the day, what is your purpose? And so I want to train them to be, productive, kind, individuals, whatever they want to do. But I think that comes from me, having, good leadership from them. If I'm constantly frazzled, if I'm constantly stressed out, or I'm not setting a good example, if I'm not happy, how are they going to learn the tools to then be that? So I think it's very important for me in my role to set that example, and not only for me, but for them.
I couldn't agree with you more. And I think it's really interesting when you've had strong role models yourself. And that is one of the pieces of work I also do with people on personal asset reviews. What do you actually have physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually? And what role models do you look towards? Because some people haven't had an upbringing that allows them to feel confident in their parenting, or perhaps they might have had complicated relationships, so they find that difficult. But you're right, when you role model to other people, I think for me, that's where we really give back, because we're able to stand and say, look, I've been down this road and this is what I currently do and how I do it. And I hope that can help other people as well. You may have heard, Amy, that people sometimes say, "What's my purpose?" And I often say, well, the best line I ever heard was, "Discover your gifts and talents and give them away." And I think that's a fun way of positioning it into the world, because it just helps us think, what am I trying to do here? And is life about making money, or is it about making a difference? And I think most people would choose the latter, actually.
Well, if you're working towards your purpose and you are living with an intention and you are connecting with the right people, you have the right people in your universe, you can't help but eventually be successful by rinsing and repeating and doing those repetitions and being disciplined in that pursuit.
I think you're right. And you mentioned about gym reps earlier on in the conversation. And I do think consistency and repetition is so important, not to the point where it becomes a grind and you want to lose the will to even be there. But just staying consistent, especially if you are a founder or an entrepreneur, is so, so important. But my goodness, isn't it hard to do some days when you want to throw in the towel and just go and do something else completely different?
Well, I feel different. Like, I worked out Monday morning. Today is Wednesday when we are recording this. I had a really intense Tuesday. I was not able to find time. I have not yet found time, but I have actually decided, you know what? I'm going to go for a mid-afternoon, and whatever happens, it will happen. But if I go one more day, I feel like I can miss a day. But if I go more than a day, it really impacts, how I feel, and I just feel much more sluggish and not just, I don't have the same type of energy and enthusiasm. And so it's an important investment in my well-being. So.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more.
Yeah. And you have to find what you like. So as well, I think you talked again about road racing, and I think you're about to have a road racing trip, right?
Yeah.
Road biking. Did it go by road biking or road racing?
Bike trip. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So that's not my thing because in Florida we have crazy tourist drivers, and I'd be taken out, and it's not as like picturesque, but for me, you have to find your joy and find your path. So, and what you enjoy doing. Otherwise, like you said, it becomes a grind.
Absolutely. And nobody wants to grind through life because that's not fun. And somebody said to me earlier today, actually, we're living around 30 years longer than we were 50 years ago. I don't know if that's actually the right data, but if we're going to live for an extra 30 years, we want to live really, really well, or we might as well not be here. So how do we build that longevity piece in as well? And I'm sure you see longevity medicine and longevity protocols everywhere. We want to live well in our old age. We want to be happy, purposeful, healthy, and well. And that requires some activity and effort on our part. So yeah, that's my mission. And I think the purpose piece is really about sharing what I've learned and the experiences I've had, as well as parenting. But of course, that is another conversation probably for another time.
Isn't that? Yeah, isn't that true? Well, I think we've talked on a lot of different items. I think overall you did talk a little bit about how it is a process. Did you want to cover like a cursory way that process, or do you have somewhere that people can look at I think you called it a 6-step process that you take them through?
Yeah, that's right. I'll just run through the process really, because I use sophrology toolkits, but my method, the emotional wealth creation method, walks through 6 steps. And that's pause, presence, purpose, people, and plans. That's 5, underpinned by the 6 pillars of well-being. And the reason for me sharing that now is because listeners will often think, what shall I do? And my urge is really, actually, how will you be first? So let's imagine, Amy,
how will you be versus what will I do?
What will you do? And we always start with, how do you actually want to be? And that's the emotional wealth part. Well, actually, I want to feel calm, confident, collected, whatever it is. And then we can say, okay, so how do you want to plan around that? And I'm not asking people to plan, I want to move house, I want to change jobs, I want to buy a Ferrari, because as you know, wherever you go, there you are. You can't run away from yourself. But when we're making daily decisions, when we can navigate that off the back of how we actually want to feel, i.e., how do we want to be, we build a really nice structure that we really like. We're still going to work and doing some things we have to do, perhaps the laundry or the cooking or the cleaning or some parts of work that you find less entertaining. But when we're really dialed into how I want to be, we can make really good decisions about what we do that do bring us joy just in that daily experience. And then that, of course, builds into a lifetime that we found really much more fulfilling.
A saying I've said before is I have points in my life where I think you've talked about it before. The folks that you work with can tend to be more achievement focused, performance focused, and you kind of lose the joy. I find that I'm a human being. And so if you focus on the be versus the do, I'm not a human doing. And when I start to see that paradigm like shifting overall, it's a signal for me to pause and think like, oh, wait, I'm getting into that phase. I need to pull myself out. But if you even just had the data to show you, and what's powerful, it seems to me, is that if someone works with you and you're their guide, again, their Sherpa up the mountain, going through this whole process, they're going to learn, once you set them forth back into the world again, they're going to know how to interpret that and also be able to say, oh, well, I'm not sensing this right now, but maybe I actually am in a little bit of a red zone right now and I don't even realize it.
Absolutely. You've got it perfectly, Amy. It's really about turning the dashboard on for your own life. And we use a wearable tracker to start that process. But I certainly wouldn't expect people to be wedded to that for the rest of their lives. But it's learning to feel in your body, actually, is this the right business decision for me? Have I made the decision that I'm going for big deals versus small deals, long-term investment, short-term? As I said, we talked about neuroeconomics. It's about being able to make decisions based on your intuition and your instincts, not just your intelligence and your intellect. And they're two very different operating systems. But of course, we have to unpick that through the process of physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual. So it's really exciting work. I can't urge anybody enough to do a bit of a deeper dive into these sort of areas and really consider watching some of the material, because yourself, life is for living. So I'd love people to do it so they're really making the most of it.
No, I think first things first, like I said, I want to share your info with the retweet fit folks, because they already have the tracker on and we can geek out on that data together. But no, this has been great. So is there anything else that you'd like to share?
I think I would also share that I'm on a personal mission to share the work of the amazing Dr. Caicedo from the 1960s, because he designed a method that blends the best of the East with the West. And he brought this method, sophrology, basically to the Spanish and French-speaking worlds. And it's available on prescription in France, Spain, and Switzerland, but it hasn't made it into North America or the English-speaking parts, obviously, of the world, England, etc. And it really is the solution to the mental health crisis that we're facing. It's a toolkit-based approach. There are thousands of practitioners out there. So I'm on a mission now to train other emotional wealth advisors as well, so we can start using these tools more widely. I'm really hoping that people will live in a way that, as I said, they do feel like they're in their purpose and they do feel like they're utilizing their gifts and talents, which are uniquely theirs.
I think it's powerful to bring awareness to that. I think I was just talking to someone yesterday and it broke my heart. Her daughter is suicidal and, in high school. And I think this is something that's happening, across, and, she just wishes she had put more intention into it and considered other things instead of getting, kind of on a medication hamster wheel and all those kinds of things. So I think anytime you can consider some other solutions that are, that perhaps can help with that problem, it's a good thing to do. And it's definitely a problem. It comes up in my daily conversations with people, and I do hope it becomes more widely available in North America.
Absolutely. Well, we're on a mission, Amy. So thank you so much for having me today and helping share the mission.
Yeah. And then what's the best way for someone to reach out to you?
I'm always hanging out on LinkedIn, which is Lindsey Frances, Lindsey with an E, Frances with an E. I'm also on Instagram. I've got my own show, Rich Simple Human, or you can find me on my website, lindseyfrances.co.uk.
Oh, awesome. Well, this has been a great conversation. I'm looking forward to keeping in touch. As I told you, I'm going to be in France next year. We'll see if it works out. I think we're still too many hours away, but if not, I'm sure we'll be hanging out on LinkedIn and Instagram in the meantime. Which is awesome. So, yeah. Well, I want to thank all the listeners for listening to another episode of the Performance Mindset Show. If today's episode gave you something to think about, share it and subscribe so you don't miss out on what's happening next. You want to go deeper? Please grab my book, From Perfect to Real. It's all about dropping perfection and thriving your way. You can also connect with me at beyondcommercial.com or amycalandrino.com. Until next time, stay grounded, stay growing, and keep showing up for you. This is Amy Calandrino, signing off.